The council chamber was a masterpiece of alien architecture, which is to say it was a bit like someone had let a drunk octopus design a cathedral. Captain Juno Ferris and her ragtag crew of hopeful misfits stood awkwardly in the middle, trying to ignore the fact that they were severely outnumbered by beings who looked like escapees from a particularly eccentric zoo. "Smile and wave, boys," Juno muttered through a gritted teeth grin. "We're making history here, even if it smells like cabbage and regret." Her first officer, a lanky man named Rizzo with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a penchant for Hawaiian shirts, nodded sagely. "I knew signing up for this was a mistake the moment I saw the job listing on Galactic Craigslist." "Want to see the universe? Join Captain Ferris," she said. "It'll be fun," she said. Juno chuckled, her eyes scanning the arena. "Hey, I never promised fun. Just free space travel and the occasional existential crisis." Above them, a massive creature that looked like a squid that had eaten one too many donuts cleared its throat, or whatever biological process it used to make noise. "Welcome, humans," it intoned, voice like syrup being poured over a gravel driveway. "We are honored by your presence at the Intergalactic Tournament of Champions." Juno tried not to laugh. "Honored, huh? They must not get many of us then. Or they just haven't figured out we're not nearly as impressive as we like to pretend," Rizzo said, scratching at the back of his neck. Next to him, Q, the team's tech specialist, was fiddling with a device that looked suspiciously like a Game Boy from 1989. "I give us 2 days before they realize they invited the wrong species," she muttered, eyes glued to her screen. The chamber was filled with an array of creatures from the ridiculous to the terrifying. Some had more eyes than sense, others had limbs in places that would make a chiropractor cry. But all were watching the humans with a mixture of curiosity and something like pity. "I think they expect us to do something," said Gordy, the team's resident muscle and a man who looked like he could bench press a small moon. Juno glanced at the podium where the squid overlord was gesturing with what might have been a tentacle. Or a strangely animated piece of linguine. "Yeah, I think you're right. So what's the plan, fearless leader?" Rizzo asked, not entirely sarcastically. "Well, we could stand here and look impressive," Juno suggested. Gordy snorted. "Then we're screwed. I left all my impressive looks in my other suit." The squid overlord was still gesturing, and Juno realized it was now pointing towards a pedestal in the center of the chamber. On it sat a glowing orb, pulsating with light like it had a particularly passionate dance partner. "Oh great," Q said, rolling her eyes. "An alien MacGuffin. Just what we needed." Juno started towards the orb, every step echoing in the silence that had descended like a particularly judgmental fog. "Well, what's the worst that could happen? We could die horribly in front of a live studio audience," Rizzo suggested helpfully. "Thanks, Rizzo. Always the optimist." As Juno approached the pedestal, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Or maybe that was just Juno's imagination. She reached out, hesitated for a split second that felt like an eternity, then touched the orb. It felt warm, almost alive, and as her fingers made contact, a ripple of light passed through the chamber. The aliens gasped, a sound like 1,000 vacuum cleaners starting up at once. "Well, that can't be good," Q said, peering over her Game Boy. The squid overlord recoiled, its tentacles quivering like overcooked spaghetti. "She has awakened the orb of transcendence." Juno withdrew her hand, looking back at her team with a mixture of pride and mild panic. "See? I told you we'd make history." Rizzo's mouth hung open. "You're telling me that dumb rock really did something?" Juno shrugged. "I guess it did." The chamber erupted into chatter, aliens babbling in 100 different languages, all of which sounded like insults. Juno had the distinct impression they'd just made a huge mistake. "Cap," Gordy said, voice low and wary, "I don't think they're happy." The squid overlord was gesticulating wildly, its voice booming over the hubbub. "The humans possess divine abilities. They must be honored as gods among us." Rizzo raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's one way to get a promotion." "Oh, great," Q sighed, turning off her tech to focus on the unfolding chaos. "Now we're gods. Can't wait to see the benefits package on that one." Juno tried to keep her smile from sliding into a grimace. "Okay, team, let's play it cool. We've accidentally become deities to an alien race. Happens to the best of us, right?" "Yeah, sure," Rizzo replied, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just another Tuesday." The squid overlord was now addressing the room, its voice rising above the din. "Let the Tournament of Champions begin, with our esteemed human participants." Juno turned back to her team, her voice barely above a whisper. "All right, folks, we have two problems. 1. We have no idea what the hell this tournament entails. And 2. We're not actually gods." "Minor details," Q said, folding her arms. "We'll just wing it." Gordy flexed his muscles, looking vaguely amused. "Well, I've always wanted to try my hand at godhood." Rizzo ran a hand through his hair, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Juno, we've really stepped in it this time." "Yep," Juno replied, unable to suppress a grin. "But at least we're in deep together. Now let's go out there and pretend we know what we're doing." As they prepared to face whatever trials lay ahead, Juno couldn't help but chuckle. "This might just be the weirdest thing we've ever done. And that's saying something," Gordy added with a grin. The chamber doors opened, revealing a labyrinthine arena with shifting walls, glowing hazards, and alien contraptions that looked like they'd been designed by a committee that couldn't agree on anything except chaos. Juno stepped forward, her team falling in line behind her. "Remember, folks, all we have to do is survive and maybe, just maybe, not spark an intergalactic incident." "Piece of cake," Rizzo muttered under his breath. They entered the arena, the doors slamming shut behind them with a finality that sent a shiver down Juno's spine. The roar of the alien crowd was a low rumble that echoed through their bones. "Well, team," Juno said, her voice ringing with a confidence she didn't quite feel, "let's go show them what humanity's really made of." And with that, they plunged into the unknown, the weight of accidental godhood resting heavily on their shoulders. The arena was a baffling kaleidoscope of insanity. Walls shifting like a bureaucrat changing policies, floors that glowed with malicious intent, and contraptions that could only have been designed by an alien with a grudge against architects. "Well, this is cozy," Rizzo said, eyeing a particularly menacing spike that descended from the ceiling before retracting in a manner that suggested it might return if you insulted its mother. "Feels like home," Juno replied, trying to keep her voice light. "You know, if home was an interactive death trap built by homicidal lunatics." Q had her Game Boy out, fiddling with it as if it might offer some sort of miracle answer to their latest predicament. "If we don't die here, I've got a list of people who need to answer for this mess." Gordy just cracked his knuckles, looking more amused than anything else. "Long as they let me hit something before we go down, I'm good." The alien crowd was a cacophony of sound, a bizarre symphony of claps, squeals, and guttural exclamations that sounded like a horror movie soundboard set to shuffle. To Juno, it seemed like every spectator was betting on which human would die first. Odds were probably not in their favor. "Let the games begin," bellowed the squid overlord, its voice echoing ominously through the arena. "Well, isn't this just peachy?" Rizzo muttered, casting his eyes skyward as if hoping for divine intervention. "I knew I should have stayed in accounting." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them shifted. The floor panels moved like a giant, demented chessboard, forcing them to stagger and stumble to maintain balance. Juno swore under her breath. "Stick together, people. Last thing we need is to get separated in this alien funhouse." "What's the plan, boss?" Q asked, her fingers relentless on the Game Boy's buttons as she attempted to download any scrap of useful intel. "The plan is not dying," Juno replied, still adjusting to the shifting surface with a sailor's grace. "Everything after that is a nice bonus." As they navigated the treacherous arena, the other competitors, a collection of limbs and eyes that defied logic, whispered amongst themselves, eyeing the humans with a mix of awe and suspicion. It wasn't every day that mortals masquerading as gods stumbled into their sacred tournament. Their whispers reached Juno's ears like the buzz of a particularly gossipy hive of bees or the morning after a particularly wild office party. "What are they saying?" she asked, trying to catch snippets between alien hisses and growls. "Something about gods and heretics," Gordy grunted, squinting at a group of aliens who seemed ready to prostrate themselves or pounce, depending on the weather. "Seems like not everyone's thrilled to have us here." "Fantastic," Rizzo said, rubbing his temples. "We're not even actual deities, and we've already got a theological crisis on our hands." Juno laughed despite herself. "Pack your bags, boys. We're going to space hell." As they moved through the labyrinth, a particularly large alien, resembling a cross between a praying mantis and a bad hangover, blocked their path. It inclined its head, an antenna twitching like it had a bad itch. Honored gods, it said, the words clumsy in its mandibles. Will you grant us your blessing? Juno blinked, caught off guard by the request. Sure, may your whatever prosper and your thingies stay, thingy. The mantis seemed pleased, clicking its mandibles in what could only be described as a smile. We will sing of this moment for generations. Great, Juno said, nodding as they slipped past. Always wanted to be part of a bug opera. The arena continued to throw curveballs their way. Walls that closed in with a worrying grind, floors that fell away into pits of unknown horrors, and obstacles that could give even the most bored god a run for its divine money. Hey, Rizzo called from the back. Remember when we thought this would be the perfect way to see the universe? Yeah, Juno replied, leaping over a gap that appeared with all the subtlety of a space whale in a china shop. Now I just want a refund. Q finally looked up from her Game Boy, having managed to hack into the arena's rudimentary systems. Got some good news and bad news, Cap. Hit me with the good news first, Juno said, dodging a swinging pendulum that could have doubled as a scythe. We're not the only ones who think this whole god thing is a joke, Q said, waving the device triumphantly. And the bad news? Some of these aliens take it very seriously. They're not exactly thrilled about sharing their divine spotlight with newcomers. Gordy seemed unfazed. Sounds like a jealousy issue. Maybe they just need to get over themselves. Or, Rizzo suggested, we could use this whole god act to our advantage. Juno paused, considering. As in, exploit their belief for tactical gain? Why not? Rizzo shrugged. They think we're gods. Who are we to disappoint them? Before Juno could reply, a deafening horn blared, signaling the start of the first challenge. It was a monstrous machine of a thing. A gigantic spinning wheel of spikes and flames, like someone had decided to make a blender out of nightmares. Well, Juno said, her voice dry as a desert on a particularly hot day, this looks fun. Just another Tuesday, Rizzo said, the sarcasm dripping off his words like honey off a spoon. They approached the contraption with the caution of someone about to defuse a bomb while blindfolded. The wheel turned ominously, fire licking at its edges, the spikes gleaming malevolently. I'm open to ideas, Juno said, glancing at her team. Maybe we should use our godly powers, Q suggested, deadpan. Fantastic plan, Rizzo said. You go first. Gordy grinned, stepping closer to the wheel. Bet I can stop it with brute force. Juno raised an eyebrow. And if that doesn't work? I don't know, Gordy said. Run? Plan or no plan, they had to act. Juno took a deep breath, the kind usually reserved for diving into shark-infested waters, and nodded. Let's do this. The team moved as one, Juno leading the charge with the kind of reckless abandon that made her such a compelling captain. They approached the wheel, the heat palpable, the spikes a promise of pain, and threw themselves into the challenge. Gordy, true to his word, slammed a fist into the mechanism, a move that would have been suicidal if he hadn't spent years perfecting the art of punching things until they worked. The wheel stuttered, faltered, and then stopped entirely, as if confused by the sheer audacity of his actions. Well, that was easy, Rizzo said, looking more impressed than surprised. Let's not stop to congratulate ourselves just yet, Juno urged, ushering them past the wheel and into the next section. The aliens watching from above were a mix of awe and disbelief, their faith in these newfound gods growing with each passing moment. It was a gift, really, the way their fear and reverence could be twisted to suit the humans' needs. Maybe being gods isn't all bad, Q mused, her fingers already preparing for the next tech hurdle. We might even get some good perks out of this. Like free room and board? Rizzo suggested. Juno laughed. Or a lifetime supply of alien wine? As they advanced deeper into the arena, they began to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere. Some aliens were openly hostile, whispering between themselves in tones that suggested they weren't pleased with the humans' success. Looks like our divinities ruffled some feathers, Gordy said, nodding towards a group of particularly sour-looking creatures. Yeah, Juno replied, I was hoping for a nicer reception. You know, with confetti in a parade. Q tapped a few buttons, bringing up a holographic map of the arena. If we keep moving, we should reach the main chamber soon. And then? Rizzo asked. And then we improvise, Juno said, a wry smile playing on her lips. They pressed on, the path littered with traps and puzzles, each more elaborate and deadly than the last. Yet with every obstacle, they adapted, their teamwork a testament to the bond they'd forged over countless missions. It wasn't long before they reached the next challenge, a series of platforms suspended above a pit that seemed to go on forever. The platforms moved, shifting like puzzle pieces in a cruel game of Tetris. "That's a long way down," Q noted, inching closer to the edge. "Anyone afraid of heights?" Juno asked, more as a formality than anything else. "Not if we can fly," Rizzo said, eyeing the platforms with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for snakes and used car salesmen. They stepped onto the first platform, aware that each movement was under the scrutiny of the alien audience. The platforms wobbled precariously, testing their balance and resolve. "Steady," Gordy said, his voice as firm as his grip on the edge. The platforms shifted again, forcing them to move quickly, jumping and dodging across the dizzying void. It was a dance of desperation, the kind that made you question your life choices but also marvel at the adrenaline rush. As they crossed, whispers from the alien spectators reached them. Words of disbelief mingled with praise, the kind of murmured speculation that suggested the humans' presence was disrupting more than just the tournament. "Maybe they'll rethink their interstellar invite list after this," Rizzo commented, his smile one of grim amusement. "And maybe we'll get a statue in our honor," Q added, ever the pragmatist. "We'll just have to survive to find out," Juno said, determination hardening her voice. They reached the final platform, the edge of the pit behind them, and the main chamber loomed ahead. It was a vast, echoing space, filled with alien dignitaries and spectators, their eyes fixed on the human interlopers. "Here we go," Juno said, her voice a rallying cry for her team. The chamber fell silent as they entered, the kind of hush that suggested the weight of expectations, both divine and otherwise. The squid overlord slithered forward, its tentacles writhing with barely contained excitement. "Welcome, esteemed gods," it intoned, bowing with a flourish. "You honor us with your presence and skill." Juno forced a smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The honor's all ours," she said, words laced with irony. Behind her, Rizzo, Q, and Gordy stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their mission. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, defying the odds in the most human way possible, by faking it until they made it. As the next challenge loomed, Juno couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. "Well, team," she said, only half joking, "let's go show them just how divine we really are." Juno Ferris stood before the assembled alien dignitaries with the confidence of someone who'd accidentally stumbled onto a stage mid-play and decided to improvise an entire act. The squid overlord, a mass of writhing tentacles and questionable fashion choices, seemed to be waiting for some grand proclamation. "Well, here we are," Juno started, trying not to grimace too hard. "Your tournament's been a hell of a ride so far. Thanks for the warm welcome and all that." Next to her, Rizzo let out a low whistle, a sound that usually signified he was either impressed or about to explode with sarcasm. "Yeah, it's been like Disneyland, but with more spikes and less wholesome family fun." "Maybe we should try to explain ourselves," Q suggested, fiddling with her Game Boy like it held all the answers to the universe. "Before this divine garbage gets too out of hand." Gordy snorted, an expression of amusement and cynicism all rolled into one. "You think they'll listen? They've got us pegged as cosmic deities. We might as well try to convince a black hole to spit something out." Juno sighed, knowing full well that their words probably held as much weight as a feather in a vacuum. But they had to try. "Look, we appreciate the whole God thing," she said, doing her best to project sincerity. "But we're really just here to, not die." The squid overlord eyes blinked out of sync, an unsettling reminder that not all sentient beings had evolved to grasp the concept of tact. "Your humility is noted, truly, the mark of greatness." "More like the mark of not wanting to get skewered," Rizzo muttered under his breath. The crowd, a mixture of aliens with too many eyes and not enough personal space, buzzed with excitement. Their faith in these accidental deities was as unyielding as their fashion sense, which seemed to consist mainly of mismatched robes and unsettling body modifications. Juno turned to her crew, the kind of desperate hope in her eyes usually reserved for lottery tickets and blind dates. "Any bright ideas for how to navigate this mess?" "Let's just keep playing along," Q suggested, her fingers dancing over the Game Boy's ancient buttons. If they think we're gods, maybe they'll keep us alive longer. Or build us a temple, Gordy added, grinning. I've always wanted to see what it's like to be worshipped. Yeah, right before they sacrifice us to appease the space gods, Rizzo quipped, his sarcasm as sharp as ever. As the humans plotted their next move, the alien crowd's murmurs grew louder, evolving into something akin to a cacophony of cultish devotion. Unfortunately, the humans' attempts at clarification only seemed to fuel the fire. Your signs are most auspicious, one particularly loud alien called, its three mouths somehow managing to harmonize. Your presence signals great change. Juno raised an eyebrow, feeling more like an unwilling participant in a bizarre interstellar reality show than a revered deity. Remember when all we wanted was a little adventure? She asked, a touch of wistfulness in her tone. Yeah, Rizzo replied, now it feels like we're starring in a cosmic sitcom, and we're the punchline. The Squid Overlord, clearly enjoying his role as master of ceremonies, announced the next challenge, a series of elaborate puzzles designed to test intellect and reflexes. The kind of puzzles that would have made Mensa members sweat profusely. Step right up, the Overlord declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. May your godly wisdom guide you. Great, now we're expected to be brainiacs too, Juno said, rolling her eyes. As if dodging death traps wasn't enough. The team approached the puzzle area, which was a nightmarish blend of alien tech and unintelligible symbols. It looked like someone had mashed a Rubik's Cube with a math textbook and then decided to set it all on fire for good measure. All right, Q said, her eyes already scanning the chaos. Let's see if this old Game Boy can work its magic. That's the spirit, Gordy encouraged, though whether his enthusiasm was genuine or just a manic response to stress was anyone's guess. As Q fiddled with her device, the rest of the crew did their best to look like they knew what they were doing. It was the kind of charade that required both nerves of steel and a complete disregard for logic. How's it going? Juno asked, peering over Q's shoulder. Well, the good news is I think I've figured out part of this mess, Q replied, her tone less than reassuring. The bad news is that if I press the wrong button, we might blow up. That's comforting, Rizzo said, watching as alien factions started to form among the spectators, each offering whispered prayers to their newfound gods. Looks like we've got ourselves a fan club. Or a cult, Gordy said, still grinning. Guess it was bound to happen sooner or later. The alien factions were indeed growing more polarized, some convinced that the humans' every move was a divine act, while others were less impressed, muttering darkly about blasphemy and false idols. Looks like we're one step away from sparking a religious war, Juno observed, her tone as dry as a Martian summer. Hey, if it means we get out of here alive, I'm all for it, Rizzo said, never one to shy away from a little chaos if it meant staying in one piece. Q made a final adjustment on the Game Boy, holding her breath as she pressed a button. The puzzles began to shift, aligning into a coherent pattern, like pieces of a particularly sadistic jigsaw falling into place. I'm a genius, she said, exhaling in relief as the puzzle area rearranged itself into a solved state. Modesty suits you, Rizzo remarked, casting a wary eye at the increasingly frenzied aliens. Looks like your genius just convinced them we're the real deal. The Squid Overlord tentacles wiggled with excitement as he announced their success to the crowd, who erupted in a cacophony of cheers and adoration. It was the kind of noise usually reserved for rock stars and lottery winners. Juno took a moment to soak it all in, wondering how they'd managed to turn a simple quest for adventure into a full-blown religious movement. Well, crew, she said, her voice carrying the weight of both pride and disbelief, we're either the luckiest people in the universe or the unluckiest, and I'm not sure which yet. Maybe a bit of both, Q said, slipping the Game Boy back into her pocket. But hey, at least we're still standing. As the crowd's fervor showed no signs of diminishing, the team realized that dispelling the myths about their divinity might be easier said than done. The alien factions had taken root, each vying for the humans' favor, their devotion a force all its own. We might have accidentally started something big, Gordy said, a hint of wonder in his voice. Big or not, we've got to keep moving, Juno replied, ever the pragmatic captain. The longer we stay, the more tangled this web gets. With a final nod to the Squid Overlord, who seemed content to bask in the humans' reflected glory, Juno and her crew began their journey to the next challenge. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but also with the potential for something greater, if they could survive long enough to seize it. Here's to being accidental gods, Rizzo toasted, lifting an imaginary glass as they walked. And to getting out of this alive, Q added, her tone light but her eyes serious. No promises, but I'll do my best, Juno said, leading her crew into the unknown with the same reckless abandon that had gotten them into this mess in the first place. As they ventured deeper into the tournament, the weight of their newfound status pressed down on them like a particularly stubborn gravity well. But for Juno Ferris and her ragtag crew, it was just another day in the life of space adventurers, where gods and mortals alike danced on the edge of chaos, and no one knew what the next twist would bring. As Juno and her ragtag crew navigated the maze of broken hopes and shattered dreams that was the Intergalactic Tournament of Champions, she couldn't help but feel like she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere back on Galactic Craigslist. Sure, want to see the universe? Join Captain Ferris. Had sounded like a great idea at the time, but now it seemed more like the setup to a cosmic joke, and they were the punchline. The crew had just managed to scrape through the last challenge, their reputations as deities somehow still intact, when the next potential disaster loomed large. And by large, I mean about 8 feet tall, with a face that looked like it was designed by a committee of angry asparagus. Vizric of the Xylaris, the kind of alien leader who could make a black hole seem warm and inviting by comparison. Vizric had a way of gliding into a room that suggested either a mastery of interstellar politics or a particularly effective anti-gravity device. His eyes, all 6 of them, bored into Juno like she was a particularly intriguing insect he'd decided to pin to his collection. False idols. Vizric's voice echoed through the council chamber, as smooth and charming as a broken glass factory. These humans are nothing more than charlatans. Well, that's one way to make an entrance, Rizzo muttered, leaning against the nearest wall and folding his arms. Think he's here for the buffet? Or to start a war? Gordy replied, his trademark grin somehow managing to convey both amusement and impending doom, a unique talent. Juno sighed, sensing that her day was about to get a whole lot more complicated. Here we go, she whispered to Q, who was already clutching her Game Boy like it was a lifeline to sanity. Captain Ferris, Vizric continued, his gaze fixed on Juno with the intensity of a supernova. You and your crew have misled my people, led them astray with your false divinity. False divinity? Juno echoed, feigning surprise as if she hadn't heard the whispers of doubt starting to ripple through the crowd. I thought we were just here for the food and free entertainment. The squid overlord, who had been enjoying his role as master of ceremonies a little too much, wobbled slightly as he processed the accusation. The assembled aliens, their eyes and various other sensory organs darting between the humans and Vizric, waited with bated breath for the drama to unfold. We haven't misled anyone, Juno said, doing her best to channel the kind of righteous indignation that only came from knowing you were in way over your head. We just happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. Vizric's expression remained as warm and inviting as a glacier. Your presence has upset the balance, Captain. My people are divided. I demand proof of your so-called divine powers, or else. Or else what? Gordy interjected, never one to miss an opportunity to poke the proverbial bear, or in this case, asparagus alien. Or else I will see to it that you and your crew are removed from this tournament, Vizric replied, his tone as smooth as sandpaper. Guess that means no free food, Rizzo said, nudging Q. Better use that magic Game Boy of yours to whip up a miracle. Q glanced at the device in her hands, her fingers twitching over the buttons with practiced ease. Not sure if this thing can part seas or turn water into wine, but I'll give it a shot. Juno, ever the pragmatist, knew they needed a plan. A plan that involved more than just hoping Vizric had a sudden change of heart. All right, team, she said, gathering her crew into a huddle. Suggestions? Well, we could try to bluff our way through, Rizzo offered, his love for chaos only slightly outweighed by his desire to keep breathing. Or maybe we should find a way to actually impress them, Gordy said, his grin suggesting he had something in mind. You know, like actual gods would. And how do you propose we do that? Juno asked, unconvinced. Gordy shrugged, his grin widening. We could always challenge Vizric to a duel. Winner takes all. A duel? Juno repeated, incredulous. You want us to fight an 8-foot-tall alien leader in front of his entire race? Are you nuts? Maybe, Gordy conceded, clearly unfazed by the prospect of imminent annihilation. But it would be one hell of a show. Or a quick way to get vaporized, Q added, her fingers still flying over the Game Boy's buttons as if the fate of the universe depended on it. Juno considered the options, neither of which seemed particularly appealing. On the one hand, they could try to bluff their way out, a risky move, given Vizrik's less than benevolent demeanor. On the other, they could take the fight to him, a prospect that seemed about as wise as poking a sleeping dragon with a sharp stick. All right, she said at last, making a decision. We'll go with Gordy's plan. Seriously? Rizzo asked, looking at Juno like she just suggested they try skydiving without a parachute. Seriously, Juno confirmed, her expression resolute. We can't keep running. If we want to make it out of this mess, we've got to face our problems head on. Or tentacle on, Rizzo quipped, casting a wary glance at the squid overlord, who was still watching them with an air of detached amusement. With the decision made, Juno turned back to Vizrik, her chin held high and her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Vizrik of the Xylaris, she proclaimed, her voice echoing through the chamber. We accept your challenge. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of cheers, jeers, and various alien noises that didn't translate well into human speech. Clearly, they'd been itching for some real action, and Juno had just given it to them on a silver platter. Vizrik, for his part, looked momentarily taken aback. You accept? He echoed, as if he'd expected them to cower and beg for mercy. That's right, Juno said, her gaze steady. If we're going down swinging. The alien leader's eyes narrowed, his gaze sliding over the human crew with a mixture of respect and disdain. Very well, he said, his voice a low rumble. May the best deity win. With that, the stage was set for the mother of all showdowns, a battle that would determine not only the fate of Juno and her crew, but the balance of power within the tournament itself. As the arena began its ominous transformation, morphing into a battlefield that seemed to defy the laws of physics, Juno felt a flicker of doubt. Had they made the right choice? Or had she just led her team into an unwinnable fight? Hey, Rizzo said, clapping her on the shoulder. Don't worry, if we die, at least it'll be spectacular. Not helping, Juno replied, but the hint of a smile tugged at her lips. At least they were all in this together. As the dust settled and the chaos of the shifting arena came into focus, Juno and her crew stood ready to face whatever Vizrik had in store for them. It was a moment of truth, one that would either see them triumph or fall in a blaze of glory. Here goes nothing, Q said, tucking her Game Boy away and stepping up beside Juno. Nothing like a good old-fashioned showdown to spice things up, Gordy added, his grin as irrepressible as ever. Let's just make sure we come out on top, Juno said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within her. And with that, the battle began. Vizrik moved with the fluid grace of a seasoned warrior, his every step calculated and precise. The arena, with its shifting walls and hidden traps, seemed to respond to his presence, making the ground beneath Juno's feet feel as treacherous as quicksand. Stay on your toes, Juno called to her crew, dodging a stray energy bolt that whizzed past her head. The crowd's anticipation was palpable, their cheers and shouts echoing through the chamber like a symphony of madness. As Vizrik launched another attack, Juno realized they couldn't rely on brute strength alone. They needed to outthink him, use their wits and cunning to turn the tide in their favor. Q, got any tricks up that sleeve of yours? Juno asked, ducking behind a pillar for cover. Q nodded, her mind working at lightning speed. Give me a minute, I've got an idea. A minute might be all we have, Rizzo said, narrowly avoiding a trapdoor that opened beneath his feet. Gordy, meanwhile, had taken on the role of distraction, taunting Vizrik with a barrage of insults and quips that would have made a lesser being crumble. That's right, big guy, Gordy shouted, weaving through the chaos with a dancer's grace. Come and get it. Vizrik's focus shifted, his attention momentarily divided as he tried to keep track of the humans' unpredictable movements. It was the opening they needed. Now, Hugh, Juno yelled, trusting her crewmate to pull off whatever miracle she had up her sleeve. With a flourish, Hugh activated her Game Boy, triggering a sequence that sent the arena into overdrive. Walls shifted, floors buckled, and a series of hidden mechanisms sprang to life, creating a maelstrom of chaos that even Vizrik couldn't control. Impressive, Vizrik shouted, though whether he meant it as a compliment or a challenge was anyone's guess. Taking advantage of the confusion, Juno and her crew pressed their attack, using the arena's shifting landscape to their advantage. It was a risky strategy, but one that might just give them the edge they needed. Keep it up, Juno urged, feeling a surge of adrenaline as they began to turn the tide. Rizzo and Gordy joined the fray, their movements synchronized as they worked to outmaneuver their opponent. It was a dance of life and death, a ballet of violence and survival that would decide their fate. Think we might actually pull this off? Rizzo asked, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Maybe, Juno replied, her heart pounding with the thrill of battle. Just maybe. As the dust settled and the final trap was sprung, Vizrik found himself caught in a web of his own making. The arena, once his domain, now served as their ally, sealing his fate with a poetic finality. It's over, Vizrik, Juno said, her voice firm but not unkind. We may not be gods, but we are survivors. Vizrik, to his credit, managed a wry smile as he accepted his defeat. Then you have earned your place here, Captain Ferris. My people will respect your strength. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers a cacophony of approval and newfound respect. It was a victory not just for Juno and her crew, but for humanity itself, a testament to their resilience and tenacity in the face of overwhelming odds. As the dust settled and the adrenaline faded, Juno surveyed the scene with a mixture of disbelief and pride. They had done it, against all odds. Well, Rizzo said, clapping her on the back. Looks like we live to fight another day. Yeah, Juno agreed, her heart finally beginning to slow. And maybe, just maybe, we've earned a little respect too. With their status as accidental gods secure, Juno and her crew prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had survived the storm, and now it was time to see what the universe had in store for them next. For Juno Ferris and her crew, the adventure was far from over. And in the vast, unpredictable expanse of space, who knew what awaited them just beyond the horizon? But one thing was certain. They'd face it together, with all the wit, sarcasm, and audacity that had brought them this far. The smell of burnt ozone and desperation hung in the air like a bad joke that just wouldn't die. Juno Ferris, captain of a crew that was now officially 2 tentacles deep in the muck, surveyed the aftermath of their improbable victory. Sure, they'd outwitted Vizrik in the arena, but now they were stuck in the council chamber, feeling like a band of rock stars with a hangover the size of Jupiter. Rizzo, ever the shining light in a sea of snark, was trying to make use of a busted transmitter. This thing's deader than my social life, he muttered, giving it a kick that did absolutely nothing but make him feel marginally better. Maybe you should start charging it like your phone, Q suggested, her Game Boy securely in her pocket as if it held the universe's last remaining scrap of sanity. You know, leave it in the sun for a few hours. Couldn't hurt, unless the sun decides to up and die too, Gordy added with his usual grin, the kind that suggested he was perfectly fine with the world ending as long as he had a front row seat. Juno rubbed her temples, debating the merits of beating her head against the nearest wall. All right, enough, we need a plan. Vizrik might have backed down, but there's no telling what the other factions are planning. We're about as popular as a black hole at a star convention. Can we trust Vizrik's people to keep their word? Rizzo asked, skepticism dripping from every syllable. Trust? Juno snorted. I wouldn't trust them not to spit in my coffee, let alone hold to any agreement. Don't drink coffee, Q advised. Problem solved. Juno shot her a glare that could have melted steel, but left it at that. The truth was, they were in a sticky situation. Their participation in the Intergalactic Tournament of Champions had somehow shifted from a bizarre galactic sideshow to a fight for survival, and all with the odds stacked against them. Resources are low, Gordy pointed out, ever the harbinger of bad news. We're talking 1 tentacled bandit low. Yeah, Juno agreed, acknowledging the grim reality. And morale's not exactly sky high either. We could always stage a mutiny, Rizzo suggested with a wink. Overthrow the captain, live as space pirates. Pirates don't get dental, Q interjected. Or retirement. Still sounds better than being alien bait, Gordy said, shrugging. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, Juno muttered, but she couldn't deny the truth of it. They needed to act, and fast, or they'd be picked off like meat at a barbecue. The council chambers may have looked impressive, what with their towering columns and a ceiling that seemed to reach into infinity, but they were little more than a gilded cage. All right, Juno said finally, a plan forming in her mind. We'll play them at their own game. If they want a spectacle, we'll give them one. Make them think twice about messing with us. And how do we do that? Rizzo asked, arching a brow. Magic tricks? Illusions? Pull a rabbit out of Q's Game Boy? More like pull a miracle out of our collective asses, Juno corrected. We've got to sabotage the other factions. Make it look like they're a bigger threat than we are. Gordy chuckled, the sound echoing through the chamber. You had me at sabotage. Great, Rizzo said, rolling his eyes. We're going to turn this place into a comic book villain convention. Better that than sitting around waiting to be picked off, Juno said firmly. We've got to make a stand. Show them that humans aren't just some galactic joke. Yeah, Q agreed, her eyes gleaming with a rare fierceness. We're the punchline. As the crew gathered their few remaining resources, Juno couldn't shake the feeling that they were on borrowed time. It was true that they'd managed to scrape through one ordeal, but their reprieve wouldn't last long. Hope you're ready for some fireworks, she said, a determined glint in her eye. Because this is going to be one hell of a show. With a few furtive glances to ensure they weren't being watched, though the chance of that was about as slim as a politician's conscience, the crew slipped out of the chamber and into the labyrinthine corridors beyond. Think they'll notice we're gone? Rizzo whispered as they moved with the stealth of a herd of elephants. Only if their surveillance systems are as good as their taste in architecture, Gordy replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Let's hope they're blinded by all the shiny stuff, Juno added. We've got to make our move before they realize what we're up to. Navigating the winding halls of the council complex was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark. Every corner seemed designed to confuse and mislead, and Juno had to rely on her instincts to guide them through the maze. If we get caught, Rizzo said, the ever-present pessimist, it's going to be a messy end. Messy? Q asked, lips twitching. Or artistic? Maybe they'll hang our remains in the gallery. Not helping, Juno said, though she couldn't help but laugh. It was a hollow sound, but it did the trick, easing some of the tension that had been coiling around her like a snake. After what felt like an eternity of creeping, they reached their destination, the heart of the alien faction's domain, where power was concentrated like a bomb waiting to go off. This is it, Juno said, gesturing to the array of controls and panels that lined the room. Time to give them a taste of their own medicine. With their minds set on mischief, the crew split up, each member taking on a different task. Rizzo and Gordy worked to disable communication lines, while Q focused on hacking into the security systems. Think we'll make it out alive? Rizzo asked, his fingers flying over the control panel with surprising dexterity. Alive, sure, Juno replied. Sane? That's another question. Never was much for sanity, Gordy said with a shrug. Too overrated. As the minutes ticked by, the crew worked tirelessly, their movements synchronized by an unspoken understanding. They were a well-oiled machine, driven by necessity and desperation, and maybe, just maybe, a twisted sense of adventure. We're in, Q announced at last, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Security's down. They won't know what hit them. Nice work, Juno said, feeling a surge of adrenaline. All right. Let's get out of here before. The sound of footsteps interrupted her, and the crew froze like deer caught in headlights. A patrol of alien guards rounded the corner, their faces hidden behind featureless masks. Well, this is awkward, Rizzo quipped, raising his hands in mock surrender. Fancy meeting you here. Juno's mind raced, weighing their options. They could fight, but that was a last resort. Better to bluff their way out, if possible. Just doing some routine maintenance, she said, flashing what she hoped was a disarming smile. You know how it is. The guards didn't seem convinced. They advanced, weapons raised, ready to subdue the intruders. Plan B? Q whispered, her hand inching towards her Game Boy. Plan B, Juno confirmed, her heart pounding. Before the guards could react, the crew sprang into action. Rizzo and Gordy charged forward, using the element of surprise to their advantage. Q triggered a distraction, a blinding flash of light that sent the guards reeling. Move, Juno shouted, leading the charge as they barreled past the disoriented aliens and into the corridor beyond. They ran like their lives depended on it, which, incidentally, they did, dodging through the maze-like halls with a speed born of desperation. Think we lost them? Rizzo panted as they skidded to a halt in a dimly lit alcove. Maybe, Juno said, catching her breath. But we can't stay here. We've got to keep moving. Where to? Gordy asked, ever the optimist. Back to the ship? No, Juno replied, shaking her head. Not yet. We need to regroup, figure out our next move. Regroup? Q echoed, glancing around. We're not exactly swimming in allies. Then we'll have to make do, Juno said, determination hardening her voice. We've come this far, and I'm not about to let it all end here. With a new plan forming in her mind, Juno led her crew through the labyrinthine structure, their footsteps echoing in the silent corridors. The odds were against them, but they'd faced worse before. They were survivors, and they'd continue to fight, come what may. As they disappeared into the shadows, Juno couldn't help but wonder what fresh hell awaited them beyond the next corner. But no matter what, they'd face it together, with all the wit, sarcasm, and audacity that had kept them alive this long. The council chamber's dazzling opulence was a facade for the iron grip these aliens had on their little corner of the universe. As Juno led her ragtag team through the winding corridors, it became painfully clear that the alien architects had a penchant for confusion and no talent in making things straightforward. One more twist, one more turn, and they'd be right back where they'd started, and no amount of sarcastic commentary would save them. Feels like we've been running in circles, Rizzo panted, clutching a stitch in his side. I swear I saw that same ugly statue 3 times now. Maybe it's following us, Gordy quipped, wiping the sweat from his brow. Doesn't seem to have any better plans for a Saturday night. Didn't think I'd miss GPS until now, Q muttered, her fingers subconsciously caressing the Game Boy in her pocket as though it might transform into a navigation device. Spoiler. It wouldn't. Juno was about to throw in the towel, or maybe throw it at someone's face, when they stumbled upon the room. It was tucked away, forgotten, like a bad memory or an ex's text messages. The door creaked open, revealing an interior filled with dust and the unmistakable stench of secrets long kept. A storeroom of sorts, but not the kind where you'd find extra paperclips. Wow, Rizzo said, surveying the scene. Didn't know you could bottle disappointment. Looks more like a museum for things nobody cares about, Q added, picking up a rusted artifact with mild disgust before putting it down as if it might bite her. Or a garage sale. But amidst the clutter, one singular item caught Juno's eye. It was a device, ancient by the look of it but still managing to outshine everything else in the room. It had the gravitas of a museum piece, the kind that people would pause in front of, pretending to understand its significance. Bet that's worth more than a few galactic credits, Gordy said, elbowing Rizzo. Might even get you half a cup of coffee. Juno approached the artifact with a mix of caution and curiosity, much like one would approach a rabid raccoon. Anyone else feel like we just stumbled onto something big? Define big, Rizzo said, because I'm still waiting for the part where we don't die in a spectacular mess. Look at the markings, Juno insisted, wiping away centuries of neglect with her sleeve. This thing's older than some religions. Great, we've found an ancient holy toaster, Q said, peering over Juno's shoulder. Praise be. Despite their endless sarcasm, Juno knew they'd found something important. The device was covered in symbols, alien, cryptic. But they spoke of history, perhaps power, and definitely danger, which seemed to follow them like a bad smell. If we can figure out what this thing is, Juno mused, maybe we can use it as leverage with the council. Leverage? Rizzo arched an eyebrow. You think they'll be impressed by our archaeological skills? No, Juno said with a smirk. But they might be interested in a piece of their own history. Especially if it's something they've forgotten. Or just conveniently misplaced, Gordy added. Like their sense of decency. Exactly, Juno said. If this thing's as significant as I think, we've got a bargaining chip. We appeal to their sense of heritage, maybe even their pride. If nothing else, it'll make for a hell of a distraction, Q said, already running scenarios in her mind. Might even buy us some time. With renewed purpose, they gathered the device and made their way back through the maze. They moved with a speed born of desperation and caffeine, each turn a calculated risk in this deadly game of hide and seek. Anyone else feel like we're living in the climax of a really bad movie? Rizzo asked as they ducked through another corridor. I'm just waiting for the twist ending, Gordy replied. Preferably one where we're not all dead. The halls seemed to stretch on forever, but finally, they found their way back to the council chamber. The timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps better, depending on one's view of chaos. There, in the center of the room, was Vizric, overseeing what looked like a heated debate, or a very intense game of charades. Ah, Captain Ferris, Vizric said, noticing their entrance with all the warmth of a tax collector. We were just discussing your continued presence. I do hope it's a lively discussion, Juno said, stepping forward with the device. Because we've got something that might interest you. Vizric's 6 eyes narrowed, a clear sign that he was either intrigued or plotting their demise. And what might that be? This, Juno announced, holding up the artifact with the air of a magician revealing their latest trick. Found it tucked away in your archives. Thought you might like to know what your predecessors left behind. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that usually precedes a gunfight or a really bad joke. The alien council members leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. A relic, Vizric said, his voice layered with skepticism. Why should we care? Because it's more than just a relic, Juno pressed on, channeling every ounce of conviction she had. It's a part of your history, a connection to your past. And if my guess is right, something you'd rather not lose to a bunch of humans. Well, she's got a point, Rizzo added, earning a glare from Juno. I mean, it's not every day you lose something ancient to a bunch of meddling outsiders. The council members exchanged glances, the kind that suggested wheels were turning, calculations being made. Juno could almost hear the cogs whirring in Vizric's mind. You propose to use this as a bargaining tool? Vizric asked, his tone betraying nothing. More like an olive branch, Juno said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We return this to you, and maybe you overlook our current transgressions. And what assurance do we have that your intentions are genuine? Juno shrugged. Assurance? You're talking to the wrong species for that. But one thing's for sure, if we were planning anything stupid, we wouldn't have walked back in here with this thing. And yet you did, Vizric replied, his eyes flicking over the device with increasing interest. A curious choice. Curiosity's in our nature, Q chimed in, crossing her arms. Along with a stubborn refusal to stay down. There was a moment of tense silence, the kind where everyone holds their breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the stillness. Vizric seemed to weigh the device in his mind, considering its worth against the chaos Juno and her crew had already caused. Very well, Vizric finally said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. We will consider your proposal. But know this. Should you fail to honor your word, there will be consequences. Wouldn't have it any other way, Juno replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing behind her eyes. With the artifact carefully handed over, the crew made their exit. But not before Gordy whispered, think we just sold a bridge to a troll? More like a lifeline to the drowning, Juno replied, her mind already racing with possibilities. Now let's get out of here before they change their minds. Back on their ship, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful, like waiting for exam results you know you've failed but hope they've lost the paper. The crew gathered in the common area, eyes on Juno, waiting for whatever came next. So, what now? Rizzo asked, breaking the silence. Now? Juno repeated, leaning back in her seat. We prepare for the next round, whatever it throws at us. And if they don't keep their word? Q pressed, a hint of doubt creeping into her voice. Then we improvise, Juno said, her lips curling into a half-smile. And hope we run faster than their security. Great, Gordy said, clapping his hands together. Just like the good old days. Weren't those the bad old days? Rizzo asked, brow furrowing. Depends on your definition of fun, Gordy replied with a grin. As the crew settled into their usual banter, Juno allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. They'd bought themselves some time, maybe even an opportunity. But in this universe, nothing came without strings attached, or tentacles, for that matter. Hope you've got another miracle up that sleeve of yours, Q said, mirroring Juno's thoughts. Don't worry, Juno replied, her eyes flicking to the endless expanse of stars outside. We've got plenty of tricks left. And with that, they waited, knowing that whatever happened next, they'd face it together, snark, sarcasm, and all. Juno Ferris sat in the common area, staring at the ceiling with a contemplative expression that said she was either plotting their next move or trying to remember where she left her last clean pair of socks. Her crew gathered around like misfit toys, each carrying an air of irreverence that could strip paint off a battleship. Rizzo, ever the class clown with a penchant for sarcasm, was fiddling with the busted transmitter, probably hoping it would magically start working if he poked it with enough disdain. Think the council's gonna buy our little peace offering, Cap? Or are they just humoring us until they can figure out how to make us disappear without too much paperwork? Juno groaned, rubbing her temples. Let's hope they're as fond of their history as they are of their tentacles. If not, we're screwed 6 ways to Sunday. Gordy, slouched in his chair like he was auditioning for the role of bored spaceman #2 feet, chuckled. I've always wanted to see what screwed 6 ways to Sunday looks like. Does it come with a beverage package? Q, who was always the skeptic in the group, arched an eyebrow. You really think we can pull this off, Juno? We've only got one shot at this, and if it goes south, we're toast. Charred toast, Rizzo added. Burned beyond recognition and served with a side of regret. Juno sighed, scanning the room. Look, we've gotten out of worse scrapes than this. Remember that time on Proxima B where we had to convince a warlord that Rizzo was a god? Yeah, Rizzo mused, grinning. He ended up worshipping my shoes. Shoe polish has never been the same. And what did we do then? Juno pressed, her eyes steely. We adapted, we improvised, we survived. Q was silent for a moment, lost in thought. Okay, so we have an ancient alien device that might, or might not, be significant. What's our angle? How do we get them to see it our way? Juno leaned forward, lowering her voice as if the ship itself might betray their plans. We remind them of their past. Show them that beneath all their politics and power games, they're still connected by something bigger. Something they might have forgotten. Ah, Gordy said, nodding sagely. The old, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya strategy. Always a classic. More like, let's not tear each other to shreds because there's a bigger picture, Juno corrected, rolling her eyes. We play on their vanity, their pride. Make them see that their history isn't just some dusty relic but a piece of their identity worth preserving. Rizzo snorted, still eyeing the transmitter with suspicion. And if they don't buy it, we hit him over the head with the thing? Last resort, Juno smirked. But yeah, something like that. With a plan, however tenuous, it was time to face the council. Again, the crew made their way through the ship's corridors, their footsteps echoing like the ominous soundtrack of a horror movie. Each step was a reminder of the stakes, of how one wrong move could mean their end. Or worse, a long lecture from an alien bureaucrat. The council chamber was as grand and intimidating as ever, a cavernous space where every whisper felt like a shout. Juno entered first, confidence wrapped around her like a well-worn jacket. Behind her, the crew followed with varying degrees of enthusiasm and dread. Vizrik was already positioned at the head of the council, his 6 eyes fixed on them with an unreadable expression. He looked like a squid dressed for a board meeting, with a suit that probably cost more than their ship. Captain Ferris, Vizrik greeted, all formalities and no warmth. You've decided to return. Wouldn't miss it for the universe, Juno quipped, stepping forward with the device. Thought you might appreciate a stroll down memory lane. The room tensed, like a rubber band about to snap. The council members leaned in, curiosity mingling with skepticism. Explain, Vizrik commanded, the words sharp and precise. Juno took a breath, meeting Vizrik's gaze with her own unwavering stare. This device isn't just a relic. It's a testament to what your people once were. It's a reminder of your roots, of the values that built this society. Values, Vizrik repeated, the word as foreign on his tongue as a human trying to pronounce an alien name without hacking up a lung. And what values do you presume to understand, human? Juno didn't flinch, her voice steady. Unity, progress, surviving against odds. Those aren't just human traits. They're universal. And right now, in this fractured political mess, maybe it's time to stop tearing each other apart long enough to remember that. Gordy whispered to Rizzo. Bet she's got a future in political speeches if this doesn't pan out. Or stand-up comedy, Rizzo whispered back. Depending on how this ends. Vizrik's eyes flicked from Juno to the device, and something shifted in his expression. Maybe it was recognition, or maybe he was just trying to figure out if he could market it as a paperweight. And what do you propose, Captain? Vizrik asked, his tone cautious but intrigued. Simple, Juno replied. We use this as a starting point. A reason to come together, to share knowledge instead of hoarding it. You've got a chance to advance together, and all it takes is remembering that you're stronger united. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a storm. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of doubt and consideration. Finally, One of the council members, a particularly ancient-looking alien with skin like crumpled paper, spoke. You propose unity based on a relic. An ambitious suggestion from a species known for its brevity. Juno nodded, swallowing her retort. Ambitious, sure, but isn't that what got us all here in the first place? Ambition, tempered by cooperation. Vizrik considered this, his tentacles twitching slightly. And you believe this device is the key? It's a start, Juno said. Or at least a reminder that you have something worth fighting for other than power. The council fell silent again, and for a moment, Juno thought she might have overplayed her hand. But then, slowly, Vizrik nodded. Very well, he said, turning to address the council. Perhaps there is merit in this suggestion. If not for the device itself, then for what it represents. The ripple of agreement that followed was quiet, but it was there. A seed planted in the midst of chaos. As they were dismissed, Rizzo couldn't help but grin. Looks like we might live to see another day. Or at least another bad decision, Q added, smirking. On their way back to the ship, Gordy clapped Juno on the shoulder. Well, Cap, you did it. You actually convinced them to consider peace over war. Didn't see that coming. Neither did I, Juno admitted, her voice laced with relief. But I'll take it. We bought ourselves some time. Rizzo elbowed Q. Guess the universe isn't done with us yet. Or maybe it's just waiting to throw something bigger at us, Q replied, ever the realist. Juno laughed, the sound a release of the tension that had coiled in her chest. Let it. We'll be ready. Back on the ship, the crew gathered once more, this time with a sense of cautious optimism. Juno leaned against the table, surveying her ragtag family. All right, team, she said with a grin. What's next on our agenda? World peace or finding me a decent cup of coffee? Why not both? Gordy quipped. They're about equally impossible, and equally worth it, Juno replied, her eyes bright with determination. Now, let's get to work. We've got a universe to save. As they set about their tasks, the ship hummed with a newfound energy. They'd pulled off the impossible once more, and who knew what the next challenge would bring. But whatever it was, they'd face it together, armed with nothing but their wits, their sarcasm, and an unshakable belief that sometimes, humans could make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, find a decent cup of coffee along the way. The council chamber had all the warmth of a meat locker, minus the charm. Juno and her crew had just pulled off a minor miracle, convincing a room full of skeptical aliens that maybe, just maybe, they didn't need to vaporize each other over a misunderstanding about an ancient device that looked like it doubled as an outdated game console. Now, back on their ship, the crew faced a new challenge, figuring out what to do with their newfound, albeit reluctant, status as intergalactic peacemakers. So, we've got their attention, Rizzo said, leaning back in his chair like it was the only thing holding him up. What do we do with it? Start a self-help empire? Juno Ferris's Guide to Not Getting Blown Up in Space. Could be a bestseller. Juno snorted. Yeah, right next to Cooking with Zero Gravity. How to Avoid Eating Your Own Mistakes. Gordy was sprawled out on the couch, a model of laid-back indifference. Hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We've only just convinced a bunch of aliens that we're not worth exterminating. Let's enjoy the moment. Maybe buy ourselves a nice bottle of space whiskey. Q, ever the practical one, crossed his arms and shook his head. Or maybe think about how we keep this piece from falling apart. We've got their attention, but how do we make it stick? Juno rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of their precarious situation settle in. It wasn't just about saving their own skins anymore, it was about the bigger picture, one that involved balancing on a knife's edge between being hailed as saviors or being remembered as footnotes in an alien history book, right before the chapter on stupid things humans have done in space. Well, we start by not screwing it up, Juno said, looking around at her crew. We've got an opportunity here to do something that actually matters. We can't let it slip through our fingers just because we got lucky once. Rizzo nodded, surprisingly serious for once. All right, Cap, what's the plan? We gonna set up shop here, hold hands with the aliens, and sing songs about friendship? Not quite, Juno replied, eyeing the viewscreen where the alien fleet hung ominously in the void. We're going to need to keep them talking, keep them focused on what we have in common instead of what divides us. On the viewscreen, the image of Vizrik appeared, his 6 eyes as unreadable as ever. Captain Ferris, he began, his voice a silky monotone that made bureaucracy sound exciting. "Your proposal seems intriguing. However, the Council requires assurances that this newfound cooperation will be mutually beneficial." "Ah, the old, what's in it for me routine," Gordy muttered, rolling his eyes. "Classic." Juno maintained her diplomatic smile, the kind that felt like it belonged more on a car salesman than a starship captain. "Vizric, the benefits are pretty clear. We share knowledge, resources, and technology. Our combined efforts could make us all stronger, more advanced. Think of it as an investment in our future." "An investment," Vizric repeated, tasting the word like it was an exotic dish that might bite back. "And what, may I ask, is the return?" "Peace," Juno said, letting the word hang in the air. "And maybe a little less chance of blowing each other to bits in a cosmic game of chicken." Vizric's tentacles twitched, a gesture that Juno had come to recognize as alien for, "You make a good point, but I'll never admit it. The Council will deliberate. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare for the tournament's closing ceremony. It will be enlightening." With that, the screen flickered off, leaving the crew to ponder the latest twist in their interstellar adventures. "Enlightening," Q mused. "That sounds ominous. Or just a fancy way of saying they'll be watching us like hungry hawks," Rizzo added, spinning in his chair. "Maybe we should brush up on our talent show skills. Anyone know how to juggle?" Juno chuckled, but it was strained. "Let's just make sure we keep our heads down and our wits sharp. The last thing we need is to give them a reason to doubt us." As they set about preparing for the ceremony, Juno found herself reflecting on the path that had brought them here. From a ragtag group of explorers chasing the next big adventure to potential intergalactic diplomats. Not exactly what she signed up for when want to see the universe. Join Captain Ferris, beckoned on Galactic Craigslist. But here they were, and she couldn't shake the feeling that despite the odds, maybe, just maybe, they were making a difference. On the day of the ceremony, the crew stood in the arena once more, this time not as competitors but as guests of honor. The shifting walls and floors now felt less like traps and more like reminders of what they'd overcome. The crowd, a smorgasbord of alien species, filled the stands, their chatter a hum of curiosity and guarded hope. "Looks like a full house," Gordy said, scanning the alien faces. "Hope they didn't come for the comedy act." Rizzo grinned. "If they did, they're in for a treat. I've been working on my stand-up. Why did the human cross the universe? To get away from punchlines like this." Juno shook her head, suppressing a laugh. It felt good to laugh amidst the tension, a reminder that they hadn't lost themselves in the chaos of it all. As the ceremony unfolded, Vizric took to the stage, his presence commanding and just a little bit intimidating. He spoke of unity, of opportunity, and somewhere in between, Juno's name was mentioned, a token of human involvement in a new chapter of interstellar relations. "Look at us," Q said, nudging Juno. "We're famous. Or infamous. One of those." Juno nodded, a mix of pride and apprehension swirling in her chest. "Maybe both, but at least we're not forgotten." The ceremony concluded with a display of lights and sound that rivaled any fireworks show back on Earth. As the colors danced across the arena, Juno felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. They'd done it. Somehow, against all odds, they'd carved out a place for themselves in this vast, chaotic universe. Back on the ship, the crew gathered in the common area, the atmosphere lighter, the tension that had gripped them slowly fading away. "Well," Rizzo said, raising an imaginary glass. "Here's to not getting blown up today. I call that a win." Gordy laughed, clinking his equally imaginary glass against Rizzo's. "And a toast to Captain Ferris, the only human who can talk an alien war council into considering world peace." "Who knew?" Juno rolled her eyes, but her smile was genuine. "Don't make me regret it." Q raised a hand, his expression serious but his eyes twinkling with humor. "And here's to the future. Whatever it throws at us, we'll handle it together." As they toasted to their improbable success, Juno couldn't help but feel a swell of hope. They'd taken the first steps toward something greater, something that could change the course of human history amongst the stars. It was a heavy responsibility, one that would require vigilance, perseverance, and probably a good deal of luck. But with her crew by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Whether it was navigating the treacherous waters of intergalactic diplomacy or simply finding the best coffee in the galaxy, she knew they were up to the task. And so, as their ship sailed into the unknown, Juno Ferris and her crew prepared for the next chapter in their story. A tale of adventure, of humor, of danger and triumph. Of humans who dared to reach beyond their grasp and, against all odds, found their place among the stars. "Ready, Cap?" Rizzo asked, settling into his chair with a familiar grin. Juno nodded, her eyes fixed on the vast expanse before them. "Ready. Let's see what's out there." With a hum of engines and a leap into the unknown, the crew of Captain Ferris's ship set off on their next adventure, irreverent, clever, and unyielding in their quest to make the universe just a little bit brighter. And maybe, just maybe, find that perfect cup of coffee along the way.